when you're going through college and you're taking those exams, yeah, if you stumble a little bit, but it's still something you crave, eat it and then say, I'm going to get better. I will learn from this mistake. And so whatever mistakes happen to me that either I caused or just, the luck of, fate hit me upside the face this time and said, we're going to slap you down a little bit, see if you get up. Well, I got up.
Today we're talking with Mike Weasner, IU astrophysics grad, former fighter pilot and space shuttle manager, founder of Cassiopeia Observatory, and winner of IU's 2019 Bicentennial Medal for Astronomy Outreach. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you for having me. This is an honor.
I first want to talk about your childhood a little bit. Can you tell us the story of when you first fell in love with the stars?
So I grew up back in the early 1950s and then into the 60s. And, that was the time, the beginning of the space age. An older brother, Paul, but actually both of my older brothers went to Indiana University, Bloomington. But my brother, Paul, who was 12 years older than me, he was a senior in high school in 1954 when I was 6 years old. He would take me out in the backyard of our hometown there in Seymour, Indiana, and show me the night sky. And I thought that was all really neat and exciting. And because of the space age just starting, hearing all these stories about rockets and people eventually going to the moon and planets and all that. But then he pointed out, well, by the way, there's this constellation of Cassiopeia, and the bright stars in that constellation sometimes of the year make an M in the sky, and sometimes of the year they make a W in the sky. So there were my initials up in the sky that I was starting to fall in love with. So that just really resonated with me. And really got me excited about, science, astronomy. But in the early 1960s, 1960, in fact, I started falling in love with music. I was in the high school, junior high school, and then high school band. So I started getting this tug. Did I want to go to music or did I want to go to astronomy? Little did I know that in 1963, when I went to high school in 10th grade, we had a new band director who graduated from Indiana University, Bloomington. He was grooming me to become a music teacher. I did not know that. My mother always wanted me to be a teacher. But no, I wanted to go astronomy, be science, all that, research, all that kind of cool stuff. But this music tug was really there. So all during 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I was struggling. Did I want to go music or did I want to go astronomy? Music or astronomy? So I went back and forth, what I want to do. Did I want to go to, I knew I wanted to go to IU Bloomington because my brothers had gone there. But which way did I go? And it was really a struggle to make that decision. And finally I had to go to Mr. Patton and say, yeah, Mr. Patton, I've decided I'm going to be an astronomer. But I also knew that coming out of college, I wanted to have a job right away. And I knew that I wanted to go into the Air Force and be a scientist in the Air Force. So I enrolled in ROTC, Air Force ROTC at Indiana University. Unfortunately, an obscure medical regulation kicked me out for 2 years.
Yeah.
But that provided motivation to go to graduate school after graduating so that I could get my commission in the Air Force, which I did do. So yes, there was all of these tugs on my life. Which way do I want to go? Yeah. I had this craving to know even more about astronomy.
Well, so, and it sounds like you have, a strong and steady path in your book, and there's a lot of ors. Do I do this? Do I do that? But is there a specific moment that you can think of that you were like, astronomy, this is it for me? Maybe it was your 6-year-old self. Or what? But is there a specific moment when you just felt like this is what I want to do for the rest of my life? Because we talk about cravings, and you mentioned that in your past comment about craving learning more about astronomy.
So in 1960, 61, I was in seventh grade, and that was my first opportunity to get into a school band. And so I started playing the trumpet there. Um, but I still had that, science and astronomy interest in me. In 1960, later in 1961, I really started leaning towards that astronomy because we had beautiful night skies there in Seymour, back in the 1960s and 50s. And I just enjoyed being out under the night sky. And I was enjoying reading all the science of astronomy and astrophysics and chemistry and math and just physics in general. And I was really starting to enjoy that, even though I was still in seventh grade and then going into eighth grade. So I started, in some of the magazines that I was reading, I was seeing ads for telescopes. And so, hey, mom, did you give me a telescope for Christmas? And so she finally agreed to get me a telescope for Christmas. It was a small telescope, a little 3-inch mirror. And so I got this thing and I couldn't wait till Christmas Day to open it up. And so as I started using that telescope, going out and seeing things with my own eyes through the eyepiece, that really, instilled and fed that craving for astronomy for me.
Yeah, it seems like your mother was clearly a core influence in your interest in astronomy. There's a moment in your book where you were both outside and she says that she wishes she could see the stars through your eyes. And you said, no, I wish I could see the stars through your eyes. Could you just tell us a little bit about that moment?
So at that point in time, this is again in the early 1960s, this neighbor lady came over, and because I had gotten so involved in astronomy in the night sky, I knew all the constellations, and all these stars were connected by lines. So no matter where I looked in the night sky, I would see a sky chart up in the sky, and I would see lines connecting all these stars. So and that was somewhat annoying to me that I could not ignore those lines that I saw in the printed charts. So when she came over and said that to me, I said, yeah, geez, I'd like to see it like you see it because I don't see it that way anymore.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it kind of resonated with her because she wanted to see it like I saw it, and I wanted to see it like she saw it.
Yeah, so in your book, you kind of you write a lot about everything that you've done in your life. Most people would tend to organize it kind of by, my Air Force years or my space shuttle years, but you really chose time over direction, and you chose to kind of divide it up by decades. And I mean, we can all acknowledge you've done a ton within each decade. Like, it is truly impressive. So what do you feel like that says about how you see the world, kind of choosing to go in time rather than direction?
So one of the things, I had never planned to write an autobiography, but because of things that I started doing back in the 1990s around astronomy, so many people were asking me to write my autobiography. So the little descriptions that I had up on my website about what I had done, different things that had happened, that wasn't enough for a lot of people. So I wrote the autobiography. And so as I was writing it, I came to realize that every decade, there was something going on specific to that decade. you
Mm.
know so yeah, I was in school until 1970s, so there was that decade of the 60s, and then the decade of the 70s, and then then I started working in the decades of the 80s. So there were all these pretty distinct marcation points, for the switch in the decades for whatever reason. So I organized the book by decades. And that wasn't intentional from a standpoint of what was going on in the decades. It just sort of worked out that way. Other people's lives are going to have other demarcation points, whether it's getting married, going to college, being in the military, their career in the military. But there are certain points in everyone's life where something happens that may change what you're going to do with your life. So in my case, there were all of these sort of meanderings around. There were successes, there were failures, which I talk about in the book.
Mhm.
But this love of astronomy and love of IU wearing my
Of
hat today.
course.
So, all of those things just kept pulling me back to this center point in my life.
Yeah, and as you were kind of moving on that path through the universe that you talk about, did it feel at the time? I mean, as we mentioned before, there was a lot of, music or astronomy. Did it feel like there were detours, or did it seem like there were all different ways of reaching where you ended up? As you look, sometimes back in your life, things make more sense than as you were going through it.
Well, there were detours, no doubt about it. When I was at IU and then at the University of Wisconsin working on my graduate degree, yeah, I was in ROTC. I was going to go into the Air Force to be a scientist. That was my number one goal of, going through college and, getting my degrees and going into the Air Force to be a scientist in the Air Force. Then circumstances sort of made me change my mind. So, a friend of mine took me up as his first passenger after he got his private pilot's license through Air Force ROTC. And I said, this is kind of neat. The summer before that, I got to fly in a jet trainer when I was at Air Force ROTC summer camp. When I put those two together, I said, geez, whether I'm flying a jet or whether I'm flying a little small prop job out of the local airport, this flying is pretty exciting. It's a new way to see the world. It's a new way to experience, the environment around me. And I fell in love with flying. So after that private pilot ride with that guy, I went back into the commandant of the ROTC unit there in Wisconsin and said, "Sir, I want to be a pilot." Well, he said, "Sign here." So, I signed up to be an Air Force pilot and became an Air Force pilot and did that for many years in the Air Force. And my goal then was, I'm going to rise up through the ranks in the Air Force. I'm going to be commanders of fighter squadrons. I'm going to be a wing commander at some point in time. Never expecting that would change and I would end up working on the Air Force's space shuttle program in California. Which then opened up even more doors for me after I got out of the Air Force. So, yeah, there was this sort of a major detour. But while I was working in the late 1990s, I migrated back towards astronomy again when I got a new telescope. And that now has, stayed with me. I still have the telescope that I got back then. I still have the telescope my mother got me in 1961.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so as an astrophysicist engineer, a fighter pilot, and an avid Star Trek fan, you spent your whole life reaching for the future. And when you're always looking ahead, I'm just curious your perspective. It's either do you feel like you miss what's right in front of you, or is the opposite true? Does reaching for tomorrow make you pay closer attention to today because you know how it's all connected?
So, I like this phrase that you use, reaching for tomorrow. So, like I mentioned, the space program was just getting started back in the 1950s when I was a kid and starting to get excited about all this. So, that was a tomorrow that I wanted to see happen. That was a tomorrow that somehow or other I knew I wanted to help make happen. Didn't expect it would happen the way it happened, but it was still something I'm reaching for that. But then, you get into college and you got to worry about, next week's exam. You got to worry about graduation. Once I started working as a pilot in the Air Force, a lot of that other stuff sort of sat in the background for a long time. But the space shuttle program was starting to come on board. So I started thinking about, what else could I do later on in my life? Well, then this opportunity to be on the Air Force Space Shuttle program dropped into my lap.
That's amazing.
And I got that job. And that opened up so many more doors for me to help now reach still this thing that I had back in the 50s about in the space program, reaching for tomorrow. It opened up all these new doors for me within NASA, within the Air Force, and within the aerospace industry. So, you never want to give up on whatever your goal is when you're thinking about, reaching for tomorrow. Some things you may be able to do on your own that will happen. I did a lot of that. but they also may just drop into your lap. You never expect them. And here it is. This
Yeah.
door magically opens. Go
Yeah.
walk through it.
And I think that's a really interesting distinction you just made there, which is, obviously the people in this room, the people in our class are all thinking about tomorrow, right? And that tomorrow is sooner than probably anybody expected or wanted. But it was something you said, which is, I think, a truism, and I just would love to hear you maybe talk to these guys for a minute. Whereas you said, I knew I wanted to have this kind of tomorrow. I didn't get there the way I thought I would, but I still got there. So talk about having that sort of end destination and not worrying so much about organizing, orchestrating all the events that lead to that moment.
So let's see. When you're working, whether, as a fighter pilot in the Air Force, you're, worrying about putting your bombs on the
So yeah,
target
I
or
stopped
whatever.
being private with,
When you're
you know,
working in the
all of my
aerospace
notes
industry,
and
you're
when I
thinking about all the
after I
technical
retired, got
stuff
the
that goes
observatory set
on,
up. I write up
that
all
you
my
have to
notes
worry
from what I'm
about.
doing out there every night that I'm out there.
So
I
there's
publish them
always
up
in
on
this
my
back
Cassiopeia
of
Observatory
anyone's
website.
mind.
It becomes
Am I
a
making a
teaching
difference? Is this
tool
important?
for the readers.
Yeah, I'm getting a
because I
paycheck.
detail
That's
everything
important.
that I'm doing.
But
Settings,
am I
what
making a
eyepieces,
difference?
magnifications.
And
It
it
becomes
may
a
be
teaching
this
tool for other
idea
people who are
that my
visiting
mother
the
had
site.
for me, or this dream that she had for me, and the thing that Mr. Patton saw in me, this teaching thing. Education is more than just teaching, one on one, 1 + 1 = 2. It's teaching about how you respond to life, how you
Mm.
respond to, the challenges, how you respond to the failures, how you respond to the successes. And when I was certainly working in the aerospace industry after I got out of the Air Force, there were all of these things that says, because of my background, because of my degree, because of what I know, there's certain things that I can influence how they're going to occur. And I was fortunate enough to have those influences on people, and on the organizations, and be successful in that. And so that sort of turned into this later on public outreach that I did with astronomy and
Mm.
dark sky advocacy, that IU acknowledged with the bicentennial medal. Getting that, just, I went, oh my gosh,
That's a big deal.
that was, I was obviously unexpected. The when it was presented to me, I was down at one of the local Arizona state parks. The dean of the college came there, and presented that medal to me. But I was there doing public outreach back in 2019 when I got that. And the timing of getting that award with what I had been doing for several years then was just, it was just an incredible recognition, not only just of me, but of everybody who influenced my life all the way through. So,
Mm. And I think there's just an interesting idea here of just trusting the universe, which is a very scary thing to do, but you literally trusted the universe and it got you exactly where you needed to be.
yes, no complaints about my life. Even with all the failures, in my autobiography, I talk about my failures,
Yeah.
and I don't talk about them to say, "Oh, we're sorry that happened to you." I talk about how you recover from the failures.
Yeah, so this season it's featuring IU alumni who have wrestled with desire and who have been kind of shaped and reshaped by what they've wanted and what they've been denied, and in turn what they've discovered kind of along the way, which is in line with exactly what you're talking about. You've had several setbacks, like having to leave the Air Force, your graduate program, your divorce that you mentioned, but you kind of persevered on that path through the universe. So what lessons about craving and that kind of desire would you frame into advice for students who are preparing for their life for post-college?
When you're going through college and you're taking those exams, yeah, if you stumble a little bit, but it's still something you crave, eat it. and then say, I'm going to get better. I will learn from this mistake. And so whatever mistakes happen to me that either I caused or just, the luck of, fate hit me upside the face this time and said, we're going to slap you down a little bit, see if you get up. Well, I got up. And people need to say, yeah, when something happens to me or to you that knocks you down, knocks you for a loop, whatever you want to call it, um, you know, if the person or the organization or the company or whatever it is that knocks you down, they're going to win if you stay down and don't let them win. So, and that was kind of my approach for all those failures that happened to me. That medical thing in the Air Force when I was in Air Force ROTC at IU, that was a big downer to me. I was doing really well freshman, sophomore years in ROTC. I was doing well at the university. And the commandant said, he was distressed that he had to tell me he had to let me go for 2 years, but I could get back in as a graduate student. So like I said earlier, that became a motivation to me to go to graduate school, which I would not have done had, that medical thing not occurred. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And then, on the flip side of pivoting and resilience and persevering, what happens? You had a moment where you tried to speak up about something in the space shuttle program, and no one listened, specifically with the Challenger tragedy. But talk about that for a minute and how you would advise people to speak up, and then how you reconcile when they don't listen to you.
You have to raise questions no matter what you're doing, no matter who you're talking to. You have to raise questions, but you have to also present answers. And I think at that time in my life, I didn't really give them the answers that I wanted them to spout back to me. I just asked the question. So that was another one of these teaching experiences for me that said, okay, anytime I'm questioning somebody else's beliefs, I need to present them with an alternative to their beliefs that they can sign up to.
But I think that's a really valuable lesson for these guys. Of it's very easy to sort of recognize the problem, but if you don't have a solution, and I think something you said is key here, that lives inside of their operating system of beliefs. That is the hardest thing to do, but I think that's a really valuable just advice for these guys as they move forward in their careers, to speak up, but not just to speak up when something's wrong, not just to offer solution, but inside the belief system that the person you're trying to persuade is a really excellent lesson.
So you started out observing but evolved to sharing. For 35 years, you've kept your logs private, just between you and the stars. Then suddenly, in 1996, you started sharing everything. What changed, and when did you realize those stars weren't just for you, but for everyone around you as well?
That's why when I started doing that telescope website back in 1996, I said, I want to share this information that I'm learning with people. I want to get them excited about astronomy. I want to tell them, what they could do with whatever it is they happen to have. I didn't want to tell them they don't need to spend a lot of money for one of these big high-end fancy telescopes. They can spend a little bit of money and get a smaller telescope. Yeah, that's probably going to make them want to get a higher, more expensive telescope later on, but that's okay too. So I started doing that website back in 1996. And if you think about that time, the World Wide Web had just started.
Yeah.
And I had started doing web stuff at the company. So I said, I'm going to do this personal website. And that website is still there today. It's probably one of the longest running websites, on the World Wide Web.
Isn't it the largest amateur astronomy website in the world that gets the most traffic?
It's probably up there now.
Yeah.
And again, that's kind of one of the reasons people were saying, write my autobiography.
That's a big deal.
Write your autobiography, because they wanted to know, more about me because of all that public outreach that I had started doing back there in 1996.
All right. Well, before we go, I think we're going to want to just have this one question answered, which is, can you tell us about you've alluded to it several times, the Dark Sky Initiative that you helped bring into reality?
So a little over 30 years ago, there was an organization, nonprofit organization, started up in Tucson, Arizona, called the International Dark Sky Association. A couple of years ago, it renamed itself Dark Sky International. But that's an organization, it's a worldwide organization with worldwide impacts, not only on people, but businesses and local, state, federal governments, national governments around the world. They prepare guidelines, they do the research on whether it's health reasons, wildlife reasons, ecological reasons, why all of this artificial light at night that we've kind of gone a little overboard with doesn't need to be as bright as we have it. Doesn't need to be this white looking light. It should be more down into this amber colored like we used to see from street lights before the LED revolution. So Dark Sky International is that organization that promotes public education for everybody around the world. And it's being successful. We see more and more outdoor lighting codes that are getting on board with protecting the night sky. We see more cities trying to do the right things with their street lights. They're dimming them down later at night. They're dimming them down in some places where there's no traffic. If there's nobody walking, why do you think you need to have your lights on? And if your parking lot is lit up all night long, you say, why are you doing that, Mr. Business? Nobody's in your parking lot. So there's reasons to do our lighting better. And that's what Dark Sky International tries to educate people about. So yeah, I've been doing that advocacy. I led the effort to get our local state park, Oracle State Park, designated as an international dark sky park in 2014, which, changed a lot of things in my life.
Yeah, shifting gears a little bit, I just wanted to read you an excerpt from our manifesto. They've learned that craving doesn't make us weak, it makes us alive. Do not shrink your hunger to fit into a smaller world. Let it move you, let it break you open, let it build you anew. Because craving is not the end, it's just the beginning, the spark before the fire. You are an educator and an advocate who's not afraid to change policy. What do you want young people to understand about following what calls them?
So when you have a craving for the universe, you can't have a much bigger craving than that. But, whether you're craving to help people with their health and you want to become a doctor, whether you have a creative craving to share information like in media schools. It doesn't matter what the scale of that craving is. There's ways that you can positively improve people's lives, which is what we're trying to do here with these podcasts. You can improve the environment, which I'm doing with this dark sky advocacy. You can improve, so many things with your craving. And you can also take your craving and say, yeah, I'm just going to study this thing because that's exciting to me. Maybe I'll write a book someday about this craving and teach other people about this thing, whatever this thing is. But you're still ultimately sharing that craving with other people. And whether even if it's just with your spouse or your children, you're sharing that craving. So no matter what the scale of that craving is, share it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, unless you guys have anything else or anything else you want to, parting comments you'd like to leave with us, I think we can say thank you and wrap this up.
So yeah, just a parting comment. I certainly wish all the current students at Indiana University who are going to watch this podcast, I wish them well. Yeah, they're going to struggle with some of those exams, but they'll get past them. They're going to struggle with finding a job. They're going to get past that. They're going to make some major influences on this future life on this planet. So I applaud them for what they're doing right now and stick with it.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike.
Okay. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode. This episode was created and produced at the IU Media School as part of the Beautiful Thinkers podcast, IU Edition. To follow along this season, check out @The Beautiful Thinkers on Instagram and LinkedIn. Special thanks to Angela Caraher for our music and all the students who researched and recorded this episode: Sarah Morley Lozano, Jillian Ramsey, and Mesa Munn.